Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is pretty straightforward. We've got a stack of expert analysis looking at the final crucial stretch of the 2025 Formula One season. We're going to cut through the noise and give you the clarity you need on where this championship might actually be headed.
Yeah, it's probably the most exciting point in an F1 season, mostly because we're facing this kind of paradox, aren't we? For months, really, the story's been all about McLaren, the battle between their own drivers.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the big question now, looking at all this analysis, is about Max Verstappen. Is MV actually a genuine contender for the title, or is he maybe just a really dangerous disruptor, someone who's mainly there to steal points and, potentially tip the balance inside McLaren itself?
And that paradox is what makes it so compelling, right? You look at the numbers.
Yeah.
MV, 69 points behind the leader. Still 199 points available in the last 7 races.
Yeah.
Mathematically, okay, it's a big gap.
Yeah.
A really big gap. But then you get this initial shock factor, and it comes straight from the rival camp. STELLA, the McLaren team principal, flat out warned his own team that Verstappen is a title contender.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not something a team boss just says lightly, especially about a rival. So we really need to unpack why he'd issue such a strong warning when, statistically, the mountain looks so incredibly high for Max.
Well, that warning itself is interesting. It's probably a strategy move, too, which we can get into. But first, let's just look at whether it's actually feasible. Is it possible?
Yeah.
And the sources we've looked at, they really show a clear split. You've got the skeptical view, the sort of disruptor camp. They look purely at the number 69 points in the calendar.
Right.
They argue that, well, this deficit is just massive, and the rest of the season includes tracks that should favor McLaren. Street circuits, high downforce, places like Singapore, Qatar, Abu Dhabi.
Places Red Bull struggled earlier in the year.
Exactly. So to close that gap, Max needs more than just perfection from himself. He needs, frankly, absolute calamity for the Paya cars. So they're saying calling him a true title winner feels like a bit of a stretch.
Okay, I get the logic there. I mean, the math alone is pretty brutal, especially given how efficient McLaren have generally been this season. So where's the other side coming from? Why the sudden surge in talk about MV being a genuine threat?
Right, the optimism. It really boils down to 2 things: the driver himself and the recent improvement in the car. The analysis describes MV as a more tantalizing prospect as the hunter compared to, say, Lando Norris last year.
Okay.
Remember, LN was actually closer, only 10 points behind at this same stage in 2024. But he couldn't quite seal the deal, couldn't capitalize. MV, on the other hand, well, if anyone in F1 history could potentially pull off 7 absolutely flawless weekends in a row,
It's probably him.
it's probably him, yeah. If perfection is what's needed, he's arguably the only driver on the grid you'd bet on to deliver it.
That's a bold claim, but probably fair, given his track record. But how confident is the analysis that he actually has the machine under him now to execute that kind of perfection? When do we actually find out if this comeback narrative is real, built on actual speed and not just, mind games or psychological pressure?
Well, the sources are pretty much unanimous on this point.
No.
The Singapore Grand Prix. That's the acid test. If Red Bull's recent technical step forward is genuine, if they've truly fixed some of those fundamental issues with the car.
The ones that plagued them on bumpy tracks and curbs.
Exactly. Then it has to show up there on a slow, twisty, demanding street circuit like Singapore. Remember last year, MV finished second, but Lando won pretty convincingly.
Right.
So if Max goes to Singapore this time and dominates, pulls out a win purely on the car's pace, well, the analysis is blunt. It's game on.
Okay, let's dig into that technical breakthrough then, because that's really the foundation for the optimist camp, isn't it? And it sounds like it gets quite deep. What exactly did Red Bull change, and why is it making such a difference seemingly overnight?
Yeah, the technical reports we've got, they really focus on this being a genuine step, not just a minor tweak. It's primarily linked to that new floor they introduced around Monza and some targeted front wing adjustments that work with it.
Okay.
These aren't just cosmetic. They seem to be addressing the fundamental way the car operates, its core aerodynamic window.
And the key thing here, from what I gather, is the problem they seem to have finally gotten on top of, which is running the car super close to the ground, right? To get that massive downforce, but without it bottoming out all the time.
Precise. That was their Achilles heel for the first half of the season, wasn't it? They struggled massively with running the car at its optimal, very low ride height without causing severe aerodynamic instability or, wearing out the plank underneath. That whole bottoming issue.
Yeah, I remember the radio messages, the complaints from Max earlier on.
Exactly. And when the car bottoms out, it's catastrophic. You lose grip suddenly, the handling becomes unpredictable, it cooks the tires. Just awful.
So what's changed? How do they fix it?
Well, this is where ANDREA STELLA's comments become interesting again. He noted, obviously monitoring their rivals closely, a significant increase in Red Bull radio traffic recently. But crucially, it wasn't about complaining about bottoming anymore. It was about optimizing the ride height, fine-tuning it, which strongly implies they've solved the underlying stiffness and stability problems that caused the bottoming before. They're not fighting the car anymore, they're refining it. They've moved from problem-solving back into optimization.
And that's where the speed's coming from, that downforce angle you mentioned.
Absolutely. This overall improvement, this better platform stability, lets them run the car consistently lower to the ground than they could before. And by getting closer to the tarmac, well, that's where all the really juicy downforce lives, right down in that lowest ride height region.
Okay.
And the analysis suggests other teams, maybe like Ferrari, for example, just can't efficiently get down there and use that potential downforce yet.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why can't Ferrari just slam their car lower too?
Well, it seems Ferrari, and potentially others, still face mechanical issues or aerodynamic limitations. Maybe their suspension is too stiff, or the aero becomes unpredictable when they try to run that low. Their setup window is just narrower, more constrained.
Right.
Red Bull appears to have engineered their way around that constraint now, and this is absolutely critical because it means MV might be able to unlock consistently high pace across a much wider range of tracks, not just the fast-flowing ones.
And crucially, tire management.
Yes, that's the other huge factor. Running the car stably in its optimal aerodynamic window nearly always helps significantly with tire management and degradation. And that's been a massive McLaren strength all season. If Red Bull can suddenly match or even beat McLaren on tire degree, well, that completely flips the script for the championship battle, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. That really puts the threat from Verstappen into perspective. Okay, so let's pivot back to McLaren then. We talked about Stella's warning, maybe as an internal motivator. But if the Red Bull technical analysis is looking so positive, why are McLaren's own drivers seemingly adding to the anxiety?
Yeah, it feeds back into how you interpret Stella's comments. Less about praising Max, perhaps, and more of a really aggressive internal warning shot, right? To stop any complacency creeping in.
Like, don't mess this up.
Essentially, yeah. He's reminding the whole team very publicly that if McLaren keeps having what he calls back weekends, poor execution, bad strategy calls, driver mistakes, then this newly resurgent Red Bull, with Max driving it, is perfectly poised to capitalize every single time.
Right.
The gap is closed enough now that there's basically zero margin for error left for McLaren.
And that pressure must feed into the whole organizational dynamic, too.
Right.
You've got the massive 2026 regulations looming, a time when teams usually start shifting serious resources to the future car. But the sources indicate McLaren simply can't afford to do that. Not fully, anyway. They can't stand still. They're apparently still bringing tweaks, still developing this year's car, because the heat from Red Bull is just too intense now. They can't just abandon this fight when the title is potentially within grasp.
And that is the absolute core of their strategic dilemma right now. And it feeds directly into maybe the most sensitive internal topic of all. How do you manage two drivers, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, who are both capable of winning this championship?
Especially when the constructor's title is pretty much locked up. It's all about the driver's title now. So should McLaren prioritize Oscar Piastri? He's got the points lead, albeit a small one.
The analysis is pretty clear on McLaren's stance based on their whole culture, their established identity, what gets called the papaya rules.
Right, the team comes first.
Exactly, team first. That mantra basically means the team's overall harmony, its strategic integrity, its long-term reputation. Those things are prioritized generally above short-term glory for one individual driver.
So picking one driver over the other is too risky.
It seems so, yes. It runs the immediate risk of completely alienating the other driver, fracturing that team spirit they've built, and potentially, ironically, throwing away the championship anyway because of internal friction or lack of cooperation.
But hang on, it's 25 points separating them. Okay, nearly 200 still to play for, so it's tight. But OP still has the edge. Isn't there a point, maybe soon, where McLaren has to make a call for the good of the championship?
The consensus in the analysis seems to be, no, not yet. The gap is still considered too close to enforce a clear number one driver without taking a massive gamble on team cohesion. So McLaren seems to be choosing to preserve that team culture, that harmony.
Even if it means leaving the door slightly ajar for Verstappen.
Potentially, yes. If their drivers keep taking points off each other, or if one falters under pressure, then that harmony might come at the cost of the drivers' championship slipping away to Red Bull. It's a huge balancing act.
Okay, let's zoom in on the drivers themselves, because that's where the human pressure really shows. The sources seem to suggest Piastri has the momentum currently, apart from that messy Baku weekend earlier on.
Which was quite messy.
It was, but apart from that, he's getting a lot of praise for driving incredibly consistently, almost mistake-free recently.
Yeah, and that consistency stands in pretty sharp contrast to Lando Norris sometimes. The analysis we read highlights specific moments, calling them catastrophic mistakes for LN this season.
Like Canada.
Canada, yeah. The strategy call, entire situation there. And also that costly spin in the China sprint qualifying session. Little errors that collectively cost him, maybe 8 crucial points?
Right.
And there's this sort of consistent thread in the commentary, a question mark over LN's racecraft, especially when compared directly to Verstappen or even Piastri and maybe George Russell too.
How so? What's the criticism exactly?
It suggested he sometimes struggles more when things get really tight, in the heat of wheel-to-wheel battle. He can appear either a bit too rash, maybe making an overly optimistic move, or sometimes the opposite, a bit too hesitant.
Whereas Piastri seems calmer.
Exactly. Lando often looks like a phenomenal qualifier, a brilliant single-lap specialist, but maybe hasn't quite mastered the consistently aggressive yet measured approach you need lap after lap in a championship fight against guys like Max.
And that must be amplified by all the external noise, right? The social media scrutiny.
Oh, absolutely. LN faces, frankly, intense ridicule online sometimes. Fans accusing him of bottling races or qualifying sessions.
Which seems harsh, but it's out there.
It is, and that perception, fair or not, it gets fueled partly by this feeling that maybe some of his big wins had an element of luck or specific circumstances, thinking Hungary, Silverstone perhaps, and also maybe by his own post-race demeanor. He seems to wear the setbacks very visibly, very self-critically.
Whereas Piastri just seems unflappable.
Almost impervious to the pressure, yeah. It's a fascinating contrast, and it's a huge psychological burden for Norris to carry into these final high-stakes races.
Definitely. Okay, let's switch gears completely for a moment, because this whole title fight drama, it really highlights how critical resources and management are in F1. And one of the more sort of thought-provoking pieces in our source material looked way beyond the frontrunners. It analyzed Alpine and their long-term failure, really, to break out of the midfield, tracing it back to what the analysis called a doomed cycle.
Yeah, it's actually a perfect counterpoint to the kind of pressure cooker environment we're seeing at McLaren and Red Bull right now. Alpine's ongoing struggle is almost a cautionary tale, isn't it, about how systemic, long-term failures can happen in such a competitive sport.
So where did this cycle apparently begin for them?
Well, the analysis traces it right back to 2016. That's when Renault came back into F1 as a full works team. And the core argument is that the leadership strategy right from the start was fundamentally flawed.
Flawed how?
They basically aimed to win a world championship while only spending about 80 to 85% of the budget of the top teams like Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull.
Right. Trying to win on the cheap, essentially.
Pretty much. It was a strategy built more on optimism and, frankly, budget constraints rather than a realistic assessment of the investment needed to actually compete at the very front in modern F1.
And the consequence of deliberately underinvesting like that.
It just led to chronic underinvestment across the board. Facilities didn't get upgraded enough. They couldn't always attract or retain the absolute top personnel. R&D budgets were squeezed.
So they got stuck.
Exactly. They became trapped in midfield mediocrity because they never had the resources to make those necessary big leaps in technology or hire the game-changing talent needed to properly bridge the gap to the big three. Any small successes they had were kind of short-lived because they were always fundamentally playing catch-up from a resource deficit.
And it wasn't just management and money, was it?
Mm-hmm.
The technical reports also point a finger pretty squarely at the power unit being a major drag, right?
Yeah. That's become increasingly clear. While the chassis definitely has its own issues, the analysis mentions it being particularly poor over bumps and curbs. For instance, the Renault power unit has a clear inefficiency, specifically in how its ERS operates.
The energy recovery system. the hybrid part.
Correct. If that ERS isn't efficient, it means they can't harvest and then deploy electrical power as effectively as their rivals. So they lose out on acceleration out of corners, they lose out on top speed down the straights.
Making them vulnerable.
Very vulnerable. Even if the driver nails the lap, they can just get mugged on the straights. And in today's F1, where the midfield is incredibly tightly packed, that kind of power unit deficiency makes any kind of sustained progress almost impossible. It's a constant anchor.
Wow. Okay, so bringing it all back to the front then, we essentially have these two competing narratives heading into the final push, don't we?
Yeah.
You've got Red Bull's aggressive, tech-driven comeback attempt.
Yep, potentially unlocked by finally solving that ride height puzzle.
And then you have McLaren trying to maintain their internal stability, fighting against their own execution errors, and the immense pressure being applied by Max and Red Bull.
That sums it up perfectly. The title fight really does seem to hinge entirely on two things now. First, does Red Bull's technical gain, that low ride height, that effective floor, actually hold up on every type of track left, especially the tricky high downforce ones like Singapore and Qatar?
10 seconds.
Second, can McLaren execute flawlessly? Can they avoid those crucial mistakes, those back weekends Stella warned about? Can they manage the internal rivalry between Piastri and Norris without it boiling over? And can they collectively withstand the relentless external pressure MV is applying?
And the sources seem pretty clear. The real danger for McLaren might not just be Max Verstappen's raw talent, which is undeniable.
No, probably not just that.
It's McLaren's own potential to, well, to shoot themselves in the foot, as the analysis puts it. Whether that's a botched qualifying, a strategy blunder on Sunday, or just mistakes creeping in under pressure.
Which leads us nicely to maybe a final provocative thought. Something for you, the listener, to really chew on as you settle down to watch these incredibly tense final races.
Go on.
Given all the intense scrutiny Lando Norris is facing and the difficult position McLaren is in regarding prioritizing a driver, if Max Verstappen does manage to pull this off, if he wins this championship from 69 points down, arguably the greatest comeback ever,
Okay.
will history ultimately look back on it less as just the singular achievement of one phenomenal driver, and maybe more as a stark reflection of just how incredibly difficult it is for any top team to manage two genuinely championship-capable drivers simultaneously, right at the sharp end, under that kind of immense season-defining pressure?
That is definitely a question that will fuel debates for a long time if it happens. A fascinating angle to consider. Thank you for diving deep into all that context with us today.
Pleasure. Lots to watch out for.
Indeed. We look forward to exploring more fascinating stories behind the headlines with you again soon.